So just let yourself come back to your body. Any questions about the body scan practice? Yeah.
So I noticed when we do it here, we usually skip the torso.
Yeah.
What would you say as far as if I'm doing it on my own, should I do the whole shebang?
Yeah.
Or would it be beneficial to break
Yeah, no.
just torso?
You know what, I do it really that way for just a couple of simple reasons. Mostly it's technical just because I got to fit it into about a half hour. And I find that at that pace, like that was even a little over a half hour. So at that pace, if you want to do the whole body, it's usually more like 45 minutes. And the torso is great. I got nothing against torsos. I like torsos. I suppose I like some torsos more than others. The other, so I just skip it just because of time. But the reason I choose to skip the torso is because usually that's the area we feel the most. Like we don't feel our limbs as much. Like usually, like maybe hands and feet more. But for most people, and I mean it's a generalization, but for most people there's just more feeling in the torso. People start feeling their heart, their belly. These are kind of centers that we tend to feel more often just naturally. And so I find it's cool to practice with the limbs just because they're harder in a way. Like it actually kind of is developing more of something we don't usually feel. You know, it's a pretty common question even, you know, in these like spiritual circles of like, hey, feel, you know, what's it feel like in your belly? But rarely is someone like, just feel your forearm, man. How's it in your forearm? So I just find it's hey, welcome. So that's really the only reason. And you know, if you've got more time at home, and you know, by the way, the other thing is if you go to like dharmaseed.org or some of these websites, there's you know, if you just or Google, I guess, just search body scan. You should get a bunch of them. Because I find it's easier if someone's guiding. When I try to do it just on my own, you could do it, but it's nice when someone's just telling you where to go. So that's one way to practice it. And it's really a great practice. I just want to stress that it's in no way, you know, a lesser practice or some kind of, it's a great practice. It's not like, well, that's, you know, meditation light. It's actually quite effective too, because I you know, I don't know, did you find that? I haven't found that it's like, there's just enough activity to kind of keep me occupied. Whereas just watching your breath is sometimes just a little too open-ended. It's nice. You know, a lot of times, a lot of us kind of have this feeling like, well, I kind of need to do something. And it's like, I need to get somewhere. It's like, great, you can get from here to there. And you're like, I did it. Went through the whole body. So, do you have any question?
Does it mean anything if you don't have as much sensation in the torso? I have way less.
In the torso then?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I mean, it's a whole thing, you know. If you want to talk about it privately, we can. I wouldn't assume it necessarily means anything, but it could. Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody asked, can you go faster or slower? What's the speed?
Yeah, you can go faster or slower. Yeah, you know, it's just a matter of, you got to just kind of work with what's realistic for you, just given how much time you have and how fast or slow you go. Obviously, you know, if there's some pace which would be like a little too fast. If you're short on time, I would recommend maybe just doing just your arms or just the torso, or, you know what I mean? I mean, there's probably some pace at which it's probably a little too fast to explore much. And then as far as slow, you can go really slow, and it's a question of then, how slow is so slow that you get distracted. But yeah, feel free to experiment and see what works for you. I feel like that's a very big part of all these practices. It's like, yeah, there's instructions, but there's no substitute for just checking it out for yourself and seeing what works for you and seeing how it affects you. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm just curious. Every body scans, for some reason, I just hate them. And it's just interesting to me because I find if I pay attention to it, it puts me to sleep. Like if I really try to stick with it. But so that happens. But more than that, I just get so bored, and that makes me like agitated. And so anytime somebody does a body scan, I'm just like instantly like.
Yeah. And then what practice do you normally do?
Well, usually just like mantra meditation, I guess.
Oh, okay.
What?
Huh. Like a TM kind of thing, or?
No, like just a mantra that I do. Like guided by breath.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, it's kind of whatever works for you. I mean, there's kind of, you could look, it depends what you're interested in. In this tradition, we don't tend to do mantras. Not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just not this is a Vipassana tradition, so mantras aren't a big part of it.
Well, it's like even in like yoga classes, for instance, when they'll start with like a yoga nidra, where it's like, it goes through every body part.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if that means like, oh, you're, disconnected from your body or something.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm always a little wary of like this chronic, the way we just pathologize the hell out of everything. So to me, what I'm hearing you mostly is that you don't like it.
Okay.
I just kind of want to respect that first. And then if you're curious, I mean, you can explore it and get curious, like, well, why don't I like it, or what is it? You might notice, like when you're doing it and you're feeling this aversion, you might tune in and like, well, how do you feel that aversion? Like, what is that like? What's the feeling itself? I personally am at this point, just in my practice and just as a teacher, where I'm really getting kind of averse to these stories that have just gotten so popular about what's wrong with us. And like, well, what does it mean? It's like, oh, well, I'm really cut off of my body. I'm really neurotic. I'm really, like, it's just, I feel like it's gone so far that it just becomes a whole other set of concepts and a whole other set of ideas about our experience, rather than bringing us like really close, intimately, directly with the experience, with our experience. And I think it's actually really problematic how much we're all trying to fix things about ourselves now. Because, if the point is to just be present with what is. So being with the experience in a direct way and allowing it just to kind of do what it does. When we come to that with already such a strong bias that, oh, I need to fix this, and something's wrong with it, and I need to somehow change it, that really gets in the way of being with it. So we want to kind of cultivate this experience of curiosity, where we're kind of curious and kind of exploring and getting to know something. And so to get to know something, it's like you have to really withhold the judgment. You see what I mean? And if I'm like going to get to know you as a person, if I like see you already as someone that's screwed up in some way, like if I see you as a patient, it would really color my whole impression of you. And it kind of then, how it is, and then you're like, your mind is looking for what's wrong and sort of what needs to be fixed. And that kind of bias, I think, is quite problematic. And it's also just gotten very popular. Everybody I work with is trying to work on something, you know, and so they're not just being with the experience. Does that answer your question?
It does. I just feel like most people I know really like body scans. And I always feel.
And you're unique. Check you out. You're different. You're different. It's awesome. You don't like them. Like I said, you can explore it and see, and maybe, you know, you could discover why. But I think there's really like a time and a place to also just be like, yeah, I don't like body scans. You know? There's all these other forms of meditation. It depends where you're at in your practice. I mean, I say this to everybody. It's sort of, you have to know yourself. I feel like it's so good if you find something that works for you and you do it and it gets you practicing. That's awesome. I wouldn't rush to make it a, you know, like I got to overcome this thing. It's like, you know, it's okay to just enjoy it. It really is okay to enjoy meditation. I just want everybody to know that. And then, you know, if at some point you're like, I'm really into this, I do this thing, but now I'm kind of curious, what is going on over here? Great. But I'd like to steer everyone away from this is kind of personal. I did this a lot, and it was harmful because I would go, seem to have a problem with that. Let me really focus on that. You know, and I would be kind of drawn to the problem because I was like, I must overcome. And I look back and I'm like, you know, if you like mantras, great. You know, it's better that you do that than try to overcome body scans but actually not do it. You see what I mean? So that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
I've been listening to a lot of Dave Smith guided meditations, and a number of them have questions of, you know, how do you feel neutral?
Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Yeah.
And I usually have a hard time identifying neutrality, but the body scan gives me that chance to tap into that, because a lot of things, like I don't feel my elbow unless I bump it.
Right.
You know, and so I'm understanding more about neutrality by doing a body scan and identifying, wow, there's a lot of, not like dead flesh, but
yeah, it's just kind of there.
you don't feel it.
Yeah, it's just, there it is, yeah. Not much is happening, yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. So the practice he's referring to, which we didn't do it here, but there's this other dimension where often we'll work with it's called a Vedana practice, where you tune into some sensation and then you identify whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And they're all fine. It's not like you need to change them. You just as a way of identifying, there's an inherent kind of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And as he was saying, that neutral is often kind of hard to see at first. We're much more used to pleasant, unpleasant. You know, I like it, I don't like it. But yeah, body scan's a good example of that. We're just like, yeah, it's just my elbow. It's kind of there, pretty neutral. Anybody else? Any other questions?
I just
Oh yeah.
That just seems like it'd be really great if you suffer from pain or chronic issues to actually remind yourself of where you are neutral, so you don't focus on.
Yeah.
Like when I do the body scan, you had a really good comment where like just try to think of where it is now instead of having that expectation like, oh, I know my shoulder's gonna hurt or whatever.
Right.
When I get to it. So that neutral reminder, I think, would be
Yeah.
a good way to, you know, really kind of piece out where your body actually is.
Yeah.
And not focus on where you do have your issues or.
Yeah. It's tricky. You'll notice when you went around, there's a lot of stories we have about, well, we have stories about everything, but our bodies as well. And it's like, oh, there's the shoulder, oh, there's that pain, oh, there's that thing, oh, I've been working on that so much, I can't believe it still hurts, and I mean, whatever. And again, like I was saying, what's it like to just kind of come to it fresh and go, okay, well, these are the stories, these are the expectations, but just what's it like just right now? And I've actually liked that, Jack Kornfield's actually who taught me that, or I picked it up, I guess I'm just stealing it from him, honestly, but that comment of like where he'd say, well, hand is the word, but what's the experience? Because we kind of get to them, we're like, oh yeah, that's the shoulder. Like, oh yeah, I know that, that's the shoulder. But I think, well, you know, you might kind of know that, but what's it like right now? What is it when you go beyond that, the concept of it, you know, the construct? You know, if you're suffering from chronic pain, by the way, or it's good, yeah, to see like, well, where is it neutral? I guess one other thing is that you can actually also just focus on where is it pleasant. Like counteract that by going, okay, because a lot of times, I mean, pain will really draw our attention. I mean, this is actually important to understand. Problems tend to draw our attention. It's kind of this basic survival instinct we have where our attention is inherently drawn to, you know, the problem, the pain, the threat, the discomfort, because it sort of needs fixing. But with certain things, it's like, yeah, you can't do much about it. It's just sort of there. And it actually takes an actual intentional kind of decision or choice to let yourself focus on something that's pleasant. You know, so maybe something hurts or something neutral, but like yeah, the way that my back feels against this chair is nice. And to actually let yourself stay there, it actually takes some training. The mind will naturally not do that. The mind will kind of go, oh yeah, that's nice, cool, now where's the next problem? And it actually takes, and again, I've read some things that they say that's actually a survival instinct, that we're just naturally kind of scanning for threats. So it actually does take this intention, this kind of conscious choice to say, wait, I'm actually going to stay with this pleasant feeling. Because yeah, surprisingly, the mind won't just do that. So that can be very helpful and very relaxing to the nervous system in general. Yeah.
So I felt like parts of my body were playing catch up, like I was on the left hip and all of a sudden my right shoulder started aching.
Yeah.
And then it was hard to concentrate on where you were.
Yeah. Yeah. So that can happen. That's very normal, especially once you kind of start bringing attention to the body and settling in. Things will pop up. And, you know, you can go with it a couple of ways. I mean, if it's really kind of calling out, you can just go ahead and go there and just catch up wherever we're at later. It's kind of your call, but I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, no, you have to keep up no matter what. If it's really calling out, and maybe you can try to move on, but if you're finding like, yeah, I'm trying, but it's really calling out, go ahead and be with it. You know, I mean, it doesn't ultimately really matter if you really cover the whole thing. I mean, ultimately we're training awareness and presence. And this is just a technique, you know. So if the quality of, to me, the thing that matters is the quality of presence itself, not like which body parts I got off the checklist. You know, so yeah, feel, you know, experiment, but it's okay to break the routine. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about the idea of presence that you just talked about. You know, for me, like the body scan was about sort of like history, like, like especially when I got to like my right shoulder, I was like, oh, I haven't thrown a baseball in a long time, you know?
Yeah.
That's something I used to do, you know?
Yeah.
And then you mentioned, you know, just like sort of accept it for where it is, and like, but I thought what was sort of ironic is that like, I felt like this history there, and I was thinking back on, like, this is as old as my shoulder has ever been.
Yeah.
But it's also like as young as it will ever be.
Ooh. I like it.
I mean, it's as young as it will be going.
Yeah, that's deep.
Like,
Let me just hold on, man. Let's all just take a moment and trip out on that. No, I'm serious. That's a pretty cool little thing there. Can I steal that?
Yeah.
That thing. You're right.
I guess like I'm just thinking about like it's like it's hard to be present when you're constantly aware of both like the past and like the history of it, and also like, am I gonna throw football again? Am I gonna be that guy who like, you know, like picks up baseball again? Like probably not, right? But like, I can't help but think about the
Yeah,
shoulder
yeah.
and look at like where it goes to.
Sure. Yeah, you know, actually, there's a way to be with that that stays present. Because what I'm hearing, like as you share that, I'm really hearing the emotion underneath it. Like you're saying, you know, you're talking about the shoulder and the baseball and football, but there's something in your voice and in the way you're talking. There's like a real poignancy there. There's like a heartfelt kind of level to it. You know, it's moving actually. I'm kind of moved by what you're saying. You know, and I hear kind of I don't know, maybe like sadness isn't maybe a strong word, but a little bit like a kind of, you know, reflection, and so it's an emotion that's happening in the present moment, and that emotion is here now. And even that story is actually arising in the here and now. Now, the content of the story is about the past or the future, but the story itself is here. And so if you don't get too lost in it, but just kind of make space for that, you can, you know, it's like that's what's calling out to you. Now, it's deviating from the body scan, you know, strictly speaking. But I'm not a big believer in just pushing these things away. And so it becomes this balance. Now, because the way you talked about it, it still sounded like you were pretty present. Now, contrast that with like if you're sitting there and you're thinking that, and then you're like, you know, I'm going to do it. I'm going to start throwing a baseball. You know what, when I get home, I'm going to call so-and-so and so. And where is that guy living these days anyways? And you know, I think I saw in the paper that there's a special on baseballs actually at the Big Five. And see, now that's not present anymore, right? But like, notice how that is. Like that's, now you're kind of, if that's kind of how it starts going, now you're really getting sucked into that fantasy, right? And now even that, if you brought it back to the present moment, you might actually realize like, oh, there's a kind of excitement that's happening, which is kind of generating this plan of how I'm going to go buy bulk baseballs. But there's to every story that we get caught in and get lost in, there's a present moment aspect to it. Usually it's some emotional component to it. So, and by landing back in that, it's usually really good at bringing us back to what's arising right here. You know, and like with chronic pain, for example, a lot of times what's really happening is there's a sadness there, you know, like a real grief about the pain. And just it's like, oh fuck, I've really suffered over this for many years maybe. And so a lot of times when we get kind of caught in these stories and move away, we're moving away from the feeling itself. So does that make sense? Yeah.
No, it definitely does. No,
Go ahead. What's up?
well, no, I mean, I think it's just about like, also like I feel like a lot of times in your classes too, it's about like, you know, like acceptance too, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I think that's just like, I don't know, I guess maybe it's just something that I'm going through, but like that idea of like being in these sort of dual modes, you know, is like something that's hard to, it's sort of, I find it's hard to find acceptance in there. And I think what I hear you saying is that like, that the act of being present is not to form judgment, but to just be observant of like where you are in that space, sort of
Mm-hmm.
dualities.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, I think that's probably good enough for me for now.
Yeah, okay. You know, what's helpful is that, is to realize that those in-between places where you're kind of pulled between things, that's actually a thing in its own right. It's a state in its own right. That's a very hard one to get. I didn't get that for years. So what I mean is that, like, for example, I mean, I've talked about it here before, but I remember the first time I named and saw confusion, it was like life-changing. It was one of the biggest insights I ever had. Because I could never name confusion as a thing. I'd be confused. So the state was be like, I wonder what I'm supposed to do. Am I practicing this right? I don't know. Wait, should I be with no, I'm doing the body scan, but what about the thing? Maybe I should be doing more yoga. And, wait, what were the instructions? That kind of thing. And I never could see that as a thing. And I remember this one moment, I was like, oh shit, that's confusion. That's the state of confusion. Like, oh, that's what that is. Because I kept thinking I was going to think my way out of it, and it didn't seem like a state in its own right. It seemed like something that's in between, like I'm on my way to figuring it out and getting somewhere. And so, that really flies in the face of, if we're talking about, well, no, I'm just being here now. It's like, but not, that's something else. I'm trying to get here now. But you can't get here now. Like, you're always here now. I mean, there's nothing else. It's just here now. And so I remember when I saw that as confusion, it was really incredible, because I also, in that moment, realized that's where I was spending lots of time. It was like, oh shit, this is like a good chunk of my life, is this state. But I was very caught in the content of that confusion. And I remember when I was in the monastery, and this one monk said this one thing, it just kind of really was helpful. There was this option where I was going to leave. I already knew I was going to disrobe and leave the monastery. But I kind of had this option whether to stay for an additional 4-month retreat that they were doing. And I was on the fence about it. And then this monk showed up, and this other monk introduced me to him. He said, oh, this is Gene. He's still trying to figure out if he's going to stay for the retreat or not. And the monk looked at me and goes, oh, the should I stay or should I go mode. And when he named it, it was like dong, because I had been in that state for like probably a week or two at that point. And then some days I was like, yeah, I'm staying. And they're like, no, I'm going. And I saw it as like, oh man, I'm really going between these two things, right? You see what I mean? Like, I was like, well, sometimes I'm here, sometimes I'm there. Sometimes I'm here. And the way he just said it, I was like, oh no, I'm not in here or there. This is a mode called should I stay or should I go? And this kind of confusion or indecision or whatever you want to call it. But it was like one of these in-between states. And it was very eye-opening. It's like, when you're on the fence about something, that's a place. Like on the fence. You're hanging there. Like pull up a chair, like a little platform. Like, yeah, I'm just chilling on the fence. And that's as legitimate a place as any, I mean, it's annoying or whatever, it might be frustrating, but it's a place. I mean, humans hang out on the fence all the time. And it's very helpful if you can see that, because it allows you to be present as opposed to waiting until you pick a side. You see? Because that's what happens. A lot of times, like, I can't be present because I haven't made up my mind yet. It's like, well, and it's very uncomfortable, right? Hanging out in those in-between states. And we don't think that, like, well, no, you can rest in confusion. I mean, that's, you can rest on the fence. Just own that. Yeah, it's like, I'm on the fence. It's nice. Yeah, well, it's thin. And so it kind of digs into one's butt there. But yeah, it's uncomfortable. But uncomfortable is a sensation. In that unpleasant, neutral, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, yeah, it's unpleasant. But that's the thing. Being present, being here now, is not dependent on what the condition is. Now, surely it's more enjoyable to be present with pleasant sensations. Present with pleasant sensations. But it does, I mean, sure, I like sunny weather more than, I don't know, cold weather, but they're both legitimate weathers. You know what I mean? So, it's so much about kind of finding yourself where you are. You know, this practice is, in many ways, you could think of it as finding yourself. Like, well, what's happening now? What's happening now? And like, where am I now? And one of the challenges is that there's a bunch of states that for one reason or another our mind has deemed somehow invalid. Like that state doesn't count. That's not a real state. That's kind of, you know, that's just the for now state until I figure out what I'm really doing with my life, you know? And those states are hard to be with because we keep searching. We're like, well, when's this crappy state going to move on already where I can get to the real state, the one I want to be in? And so, yeah, those like confusion or doubt, on the fence, I mean, whatever you want to call them, it's very useful to have that as part of your menu choices. Because a lot of times that's what's going on, you know? I mean, you know, like mixed feelings, you know? And you're like, how are you feeling? It's like, well, I got mixed feelings. But it's hard to respect that as a thing, right? You're like, I got mixed feelings, but it's legit. You could have mixed feelings. That is a totally legitimate experience. And it's a natural one. We have it a lot, right? Our ambivalence. And we often see those as a kind of like failure state. It's like, well, that's like this inadequate, deficient state. That's not a real state. That's like an inferior state. But it's not. It's not. It's every bit as legitimate as any other state. Does that make sense? Good. Yeah.
How do you distinguish those states that you just described from Dooku?
No, they're dukkha. They've been solved.
So Dooku seems to have like an element of almost like a cycle, for me, like I created it somehow.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? I take that back. It's not necessarily dukkha. The dukkha means suffering, right? So that's kind of the general, the basic fundamental suffering that the Buddha was addressing. It's mostly dukkha if you think it's wrong and you feel like you have to change it. I guess that's what I'm saying, is that if you allow it and respect it, we're like, hey, confusion, if I'm confused, I'm confused. I mean, what? There's no law against it. It's not. So it's dukkha when the way most of us experience is like, oh, this is wrong. This is bad. I need to get over this. I need to fix this. Now you're at odds with the experience. And that's dukkha. We'll always suffer when we're fighting reality. But you can embrace it and allow it, and then it's just as legitimate as anything else. And then it's not dukkha, it's what is. And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, a lot of times confusion, you know, like letting yourself hang in that confusion and just letting yourself not know, you know, it just makes that space, and often that's what's going to happen before there is an insight. And to truly let yourself not know is a very powerful experience. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, we've only just got a couple of minutes. Anybody else? Yeah.
Did you stay or go?
I did. I stayed for the 4 months. Yeah. And actually, he had a lot to do with that. Just that one statement. I remember it was like I landed. So I was like, oh shit, right. This is it. This is the should I stay or should I go mode. And it was very liberating because I kept trying to figure it out. I was like, well, should I stay or should I go? Sorry, now I got that song in my head. So it really landed, and it made me very present. And I kept, see, the thing about that mode where you're trying to figure it out, you keep thinking that, oh, I'll figure it out. Like I just need to think about it some more. But it's, you know, what this practice is so much about is realizing that you're not going to think your way out of these things. Like the thinking is the problem. Like the thinking is what we're caught in. And we keep just going around and around and around, believing that it's just, well, I just haven't thought about it enough. But that's really, really misleading, because it's actually like, no, the alternative is just dropping into the body and not being caught in this thinking. And a lot of times that actually will help with the confusion a lot. Like when you drop in the body, you could feel what's really wanting to happen. And yeah, in that case, yeah, I remember, I was like, oh yeah, this is great. Why don't I just stay here for a while? All right. Is there a quick hand there? Is it quick? No?
To me, the whole should I stay, should I go, seems to be a result of being really attached to the outcome of whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd rather pick the option that's going to have the outcome that's more pleasurable to be attached to. How are these kinds of, how does, this is super esoteric and I haven't had a lot of sleep, but I think this might make sense. How does the alleviation of one affect the other? Like being less attached to the outcome?
Right.
How does that influence how much suffering will be caused by confusion? Or is that?
Yeah. No, I mean, it may, well, the thing is, if you stay, there will be trouble. And then if you go, sorry, I had to wrap it up in 1 minute. Let's, do you want to just come up afterwards and we'll talk about it? I'm like, hey, is this quick? We got about a minute. Yeah, it's really esoteric and I haven't gotten much sleep lately. They just come on out. I'm happy to talk to you about it. I just got to wrap it up.